Hello, everybody. My name is Xueyang Wu. I'm a third-year PhD student in the University of Florida. My PhD advisor is Dr. Michael Tonks. It's my great pleasure to present my research work at TMS 2021. And the topic of my presentation is quantitative phase field modeling for corrosion of engine materials at high temperature. The outline of my talk includes the following. I will first give a brief introduction of the project background, and then I will talk a little bit about what the phase field approach is, and I will describe my phase field model in a little bit more detail, followed by some simulation results. And finally, I will give some future work perspective and then summarize my presentation. So in a car engine combustion chamber and under normal operating conditions, the normal operating temperature, the engine parts such as the valve steel can resist corrosion because of its high chrome content. For example, we are looking at the 21-2 type of alloy in here. It has 20% of chrome. But as the engine performance improves, the temperature inside of the chamber increases as well, up to around 800 Celsius. And the chamber is filled by the corrosive exhaust gas, such as the carbon dioxide or the carbon monoxide. In this case, the valve steel sensitization might occur in the form of the intergranular or pitting corrosion. Here is a picture of the real material degradation in a combustion chamber. It's provided by Mogul, is our industrial collaborator. So why do we need a mechanistic model to simulate the corrosion? Well, there are two main reasons. The first reason is that the industry currently employs a conservative materials selection method. What that means is that if we look at this scatter plot, it has different types of materials and its corresponding maximum temperature that it can perform, that it can withstand without going through corrosion. But in reality, the engine designers will tend to choose the better materials that are corresponding to the higher temperatures just to be safe. But this will, of course, increase the cost. And at the same time, because this kind of this material selection approach is heavily based on the employment history, meaning that whenever there's a new engine design occurs, the same approach won't be applicable anymore. And the second reason that we need the mechanistic model is that there's currently no quantitative understanding of the sensitization. And of course, the analytical models cannot resolve microstructure. So we need a mechanistic model that can include both the environmental factor and the material property factor on corrosion. The environmental factor includes the temperature or the composition of the exhaust gas, and the material property includes the alloy composition and the alloy microstructure. So now I will briefly talk about the phase field approach, and it can be easily illustrated by these two figures on the right. So basically, in the phase field approach, you would assign one field variable to each grain or to each phase, and this field variable is called outer parameter. So, for example, on the top figure, we are looking at several grains of polycrystalline material, and if we draw a horizontal line across 5 grains, then we will have 5 outer parameters that are plotted on the bottom and represented by different colors. The one important feature of this outer parameter is that they are one inside of its own grain, and it smoothly reduces to 0 at the grain boundary. So the evolution of the outer parameter, or we can say the evolution of the grain the grain growth or the phase transformation is governed by the Canhiller equation. This Greek letter eta represents the outer parameter, and L is the mobility, F is the system free energy. Now we have a way to quantify the phase transformation. The diffusion, of course, is occurring at the same time and is governed by the Canhiller equation. So in this Canhiller equation, it's basically just the diffusion equation. C is the concentration variable, M is the diffusion mobility, and F again is the system free energy. To more accurately represent the species of the oxide formed on the alloy, we have experimental collaborator team from the University of Wisconsin. They have performed a bunch of oxidation experiments as well as characterization to inform what kind of species or what kind of phases we need to include in our Facefield frame. So yeah, in the left picture is a STEM characterization, and there is a EDIS line profile in here, and the result of the EDIS analysis is on the right. So in the red figure, the left side is the environment, is the gas, and the right side is the alloy substrate. So we can see that there are basically three types of oxides formed on the substrate. The outer oxide layer is rich in manganese, and the middle layer is rich in chrome, and the inner layer has both chrome and manganese oxide, and it has a spinel structure, so I will refer to it as the spinel oxide from now on. And now we have we know that there are three types of alloys formed, so we need to include all of those in our Facefield model as well, and that's exactly what we did. So in this bottom picture is the Facefield domain. We have 6 phases: the alloy phase, and the void phase was observed in TM. The 3 oxide phase I just mentioned in the previous slide: the spinel oxide, chromium, and the manganese oxide, and finally is the gas phase. We also have 5 diffusing species. They are chrome, manganese, iron, oxygen, and metal vacancies. My Facefield model is based on the Kim-Suzuki theory. As I said before, the 2 governing equations, they evolve the phases and the concentrations to minimize the system free energy. So how to define the system free energy becomes a key point in our Facefield framework. So the free energy includes 2 basic parts: the chemical energy and the interfacial energy. Usually the interfacial energy is pretty standardized. It has the sum of the gradient energy and the potential energy. So the gradient energy will diffuse the outer parameter and make the interfaces smooth. And the potential energy is to penalize the interface if it's too wide. So now we are left with the definition of the chemical bulk energy, and that needs to be handled with much more carefully in our system. So first of all, we have alloy phase that has an FCC structure. It is a random substitutional phase, meaning that any of the alloying species, the iron, chrome, or the manganese, can sit on any of the lattices randomly without any preference. And this is represented by the subregular solution formulation. However, for the oxide phases, they have a more ordered structure. For example, in the manganese oxide, the oxygen ions can only sit on its own sublattice sets, but the alloying ions can only sit on the manganese sublattice sets. And in this case, the compound energy formulation is more appropriate. And if we relate the lattice fraction from the compound energy formulation and the molar fraction, then we can formulate our Canhelier equation using the molar fraction as the conserved variables. And finally, for the gas phase, we assume the oxygen to be the van der Waals gas, and we calculate its energy using the Helmholtz free energy function. Because the Helmholtz free energy has a very complicated form, so we'll have to use the parabolic approximation to eventually approximate the gas phase energy. Now, plugging in all of the energy terms and using the uniform diffusivities, meaning that the diffusivities of all the components in all the phases are the same, and also use the uniform interfacial mobilities. This is the mesoscale oxidation simulation result we obtained. So the solid lines represent the phases, the other parameters, and the dashed lines are the molar fraction of the diffusion species. So specifically, the purple dashed line is the molar fraction of the vacancy. The green is the molar fraction of oxygen. The brown is chrome, and the light blue is the molar fraction of the manganese. So let me play this video. And immediately we can see that the manganese oxide phase is shrinking. Sorry, I need to first say that what each of these phases are. So from left to right, we have the alloy phase, the void phase, spinel oxide, chromium oxide, manganese oxide, and the gas phase. So let me play this again. And we can see that the manganese oxide phase is shrinking and the spinel phase is growing to both directions. Now the manganese oxide phase has disappeared, and the chromium phase was disappeared as well. Now the only phase that are left are the void, the spinel, and the gas phase. Now we need to compare that oxide growth trend with the experiment. So the picture on the left is the stem characterization. The yellow region is the oxide thickness of the spinel oxide phase, changing with time, and the blue region is the manganese oxide phase thickness changing with time. So we can see that the spinel phase is growing and the manganese oxide phase is shrinking. And that is exactly what we just observed from the experiment. So from the simulation. So the red plot is the spinel oxide is growing with time, and the black plot is the manganese oxide is shrinking with time. So the conclusion of this slide is that the oxide growth trend predicted by the simulation matches the oxide growth trend observed from the experiments. And when we look at the equilibrium chemical energies of all the phases, we can kind of explain why how that trend happens, especially if we look at the chemical energy of the three oxide phases. So the spinel phase has the lowest energy, and the manganese oxide phase has the highest energy. So that partially explains why the spinel phase was growing, and the manganese oxide phase was shrinking, because as we mentioned before, the governing equations are always trying to minimize the system free energy. Now the thermodynamic part is justified from our simulation. we need to see how the kinetics will affect the oxide growth. So there are two types of mobility parameters: the diffusion mobility and the interfacial mobility. The picture on the left, we compare using a higher metal diffusion mobility represented by the dotted line, and a smaller metal diffusion mobility represented by the solid line. So we can see that when we use a higher metal diffusion mobility, the three oxide layers, they grow faster into both the metal phase and the gas phase. And that's what we would expect. And if we have higher interfacial mobility represented by the dashed line as well in the picture on the right, we can also observe that the oxide phases grow faster with a higher interfacial mobility into the metal phase, but it doesn't quite affect the oxide growth into the gas phase, because we assume that the corrosion is mostly diffusion controlled. Now, the second part of my Facefield model is the electrochemistry, and there will be electric field and electric potential established inside of my system due to the different diffusivities of the traveling charge of the traveling charge particles. And there are several assumptions being made. The first assumption is the couple current condition. What it means is basically the sum of all the current density is zero, because we want the metal charge density and the electric charge density to be cancelled. So it can be also written in another form in here, where Z is the valence of the components and J is the flux of the components. Another assumption we made is the electron neutrality, which is that we assume that there's no space charge, because we don't want to use a very high resolution to simulate the space charge separation, because that will exist that will exceed our mesoscale. And we use the relationship between the electric current density and the phi, the electric potential. Sigma E is the electric conductivity in different oxides. So combine these two equations, we get a modified Canfield equation. So basically now the time derivative of the concentration is governed by the diffusion motion as well as the drifting process. The electric field is calculated by the negative gradient of the electric potential phi. Now, on this slide, I'm showing the electric field of the three different oxides. So notice that these three plots, they are interpolated electric field, meaning that the electric field only has meaningful values inside of the bulk oxides. So there are several features that can be taken from this slide. The first feature is that the electric field only has very large values in the boundary of the oxides for both of the three oxides, and this is because the charged particles likes to accumulate at the boundaries of the material or the surface of the material. The second feature is that the electric field is almost constant inside of the bulk material, and this is the same as the conclusion from some papers. And the last feature is that the electric field has a very positive spike, a very huge positive spike between the interface of the alloy and the first oxide layer. And it has a huge negative spike at the surface of the material. So this will accelerate the corrosion of the material because the huge positive spike will attract the negative oxygen ions diffusing inwards, and the huge negative electric field will attract the positive metal ions diffusion towards the surface of the material. Now, in the future, we need to couple the elastic strain energy to the phase field, because according to some papers, to some literatures, the grain boundaries that are perpendicular to the interfaces will have some strains caused by the oxide growth. And of course, we will have to include the microstructure of the alloy subject by either the Voronoi tessellation that is available in the MOOS framework that is developed by Idaho National Laboratory, or we can use some image mapping software to directly capture the structure from ICM. And lastly, we'll perform verification and validation of the mesoscale corrosion model using the CODA developed by Sandia National Lab. So in summary, I presented a Facefield model that can simulate the stainless steel corrosion happen in a car combustion chamber at high temperature. And the upside growth trend predicted by my Facefield model, they match the observations from the experimental characterizations. And lastly, an electrochemical model was coupled to the Facefield framework as well. And here I want to acknowledge some of the resources that are related to my research work. And here are some relevant literatures. And thank you all for attending. Please feel free to type in your questions or comments in the chat. Thank you very much.